Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Hannah Broderud.
And I'm Luke Freeman. And today we're in beautiful Bozeman, Montana recording. We've got Karen Lum here. Super excited about it. Hannah, you'll introduce Karen in a second. But first I want to remind everyone about what we're doing. This season is all about intentional leadership. We've talked about the values that drive our leadership. We've talked about survival strategies that we use and how we manage basically all of these parts of ourselves to learn to lead ourselves effectively and move forward intentionally, not just kind of hither and yon and wherever the world takes us, right? So this month we are talking about we have contributions to make, and those contributions might change situationally. They might change based on the things we're passionate about or our values. They might change based on where we are in life. Might have a different, unique contribution when I'm in my 20s versus when I'm in my 40s. So that's the theme of this month. As a reminder, for every month, we have a free download that helps you reflect on that month's topics at magicintheroom.com. So you can go there, get your download, follow along. Strongly encourage you to do that and reflect as we go forward. Hannah.
All right. I am thrilled to have Karen Lum on the podcast today. Karen is a dear friend and a business consultant here in Bozeman. And she goes by the title Business Co-Pilot. And I love that. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's great to have you finally. We've been talking about having you on for, it seems, as long as we've had the podcast. So I'm glad we could finally make it happen. Tell us a little bit about your work. What does it mean to be a business co-pilot? What do you do? And what's a little bit of your story? Like, what led you to this place that you're in today in your career?
That's a big question
It
when I'm
is,
about
I
to
know.
have 50 trips around the sun, but I'll try to keep it short. I am also thrilled to be here. I know we've tried to make it happen, so I'm glad we're all sitting here.
Yeah.
I call myself a business co-pilot, first of all, because I was really struggling with the word coach, to be totally honest, in the very beginning of doing consulting work.
Yeah.
I just had been exposed to so many types of coaching and so many coaches that I did not align with in style and approach and philosophy.
Right.
And when I finally landed on the word co-pilot, it feels like a fit because I am not in the driver's seat, right?
Yeah.
My clients are in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
It's their life, it's their career, it's their decisions, their opinions, their experiences. And really, we all just need, a thought partner from time to time, somebody who's in our corner, but not just in our corner cheering us on, also in our corner holding up the mirror to tough things and giving us space to actually show up for ourselves in ways that sometimes are quite uncomfortable, right? So to me, a co-pilot is there. You don't always need them. In fact, much of the time you're flying through the skies and it's not a problem. But when you do need a co-pilot, to turn to somebody and be able to say, what do you think about this? Or what do you see in my decisions here? Or can we co-create something here because I'm just kind of feeling lonely in the process? And so that's a lot about what I do.
Right.
And I'm doing that in the room with business partners, sometimes individuals, whether it be solopreneurs, sometimes employees, right? Organizational leaders in companies who are just not finding either mentorship or connection with folks on their own teams.
Yeah.
And then also in the case of training, which looks like I know a lot of work that you all do as well. So just facilitating groups to do some of that collective reflection and instilling new skills in working together. So that's what I do, and I love it. I think we all have that in common, right? It's pretty powerful, inspirational stuff to watch people show up for themselves when you give them an invitation to do it.
Yeah, and I love that clarity that you have. And, this is almost like nesting dolls here because we're talking about as we lead ourselves as we navigate our career and the way that we contribute to the world around us. Like that should be something that we steward and that gets more clear over time. And I love just the clarity of language around what does it mean to be a co-pilot and why did you choose that word and what is it that you love about helping leaders or helping groups of people reflect and move forward and build skills. So you're already modeling what we're talking about today, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
So why do you care about co-piloting, coaching, consulting, working with business? I know you work with a lot of business owners, and also with people within larger organizations. Why do you care, and how did you kind of come to choose this work?
Yeah, I think ultimately, well, first of all, I come from quite a line of teachers in my family. And I think that has a big impact on how I see the world, the experiences that I've had in my life, just even how I've been spoken to since I was a young person, right? And ultimately, I have just always felt pretty fascinated about the human experience. Like, what does it mean to be alive? Yeah. And how do we find our way? Yeah. And I think some of that is I've had experiences as a younger person watching people in my life that I cared about navigate hard things. And I started to become curious about how are they doing it and what does it look like when they crash and fail, and what does it look like when they have successes and how do they bounce back? And maybe I'm just a naturally curious person. In college, I went to University of Washington, and I think I just kind of fell into some lucky things. I worked for some amazing professors and people who really developed and helped me hone that skill. So I worked for professors in sociology department, and I ended up getting a degree in speech communications with an emphasis around group process and facilitation. And so that was really my first experience of like, what happens when you use your presence and your words to guide and invite other people. Right. And I kind of was like, this is cool. I like this. Yeah. And then early on in my career, I actually worked in the nonprofit sector. And I have to say, I feel bad saying this because I love the work I do now that's much more business and corporate oriented. But I think the most fulfilling thing I ever did was work in the nonprofit sector with mainly at-risk youth under the guise of therapists and counselors. And I only bring that up because when you ask me why I care, I think learning to facilitate groups and individuals through the eyes of therapists and counselors versus my first experiences as a trainer being get up and teach a concept in front of the room changed everything. Yeah. Because what I realized was it was much more about being a space holder and learning how to really listen and to watch body language and all sorts of things than it was about being a subject matter expert, coming to the front of the room and teaching. Right. Even though I think all three of us do that, right? All three of us are sometimes paid to get up and teach concepts and information to people. And I think when you can do it from a place of understanding that there are whole people in the room, right? With personal well-being to consider and stories happening about who they are and where they've come from, like all of that stuff makes a huge difference in whether they can take it in or whether they're even interested in it.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't talked about this, but I just have a lot of shared DNA with how I got into facilitation. And whenever you say working with at-risk populations, there's something about doing that work that brings your perspective to this place where, at least for me, and so I'm saying this is my experience and I'm asking if you share it, but where I walk into a room with people assuming that if given the space, they want to grow and develop and progress. That if given the right conditions, I don't believe in a lot of like laws of the universe, right? But emergence is one of them that if you said like, hey, what's one thing that you're like, yep, I'm going to get close to 100% on, like it's this idea that when the conditions are right, whatever's next developmentally will emerge and people will progress. And And then also recognizing that the systems that people are in, the organizations that they're a part of, the families that they spend most of their time with, how far they live from their workplace, like all of those things are huge factors in, are the conditions right for them to reach new levels of performance? So I don't know, like thoughts, does that resonate? Like what's your experience of it?
Hell yeah, that resonates big time, right? Like I often talk about the analogy of the garden, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got, you guys ever talk about this, right? Like you've got
Luke did a video very recently about a garden analogy. I don't know if it's the same analogy.
It's the same.
It's got to be the same, right?
Yeah.
Some, I mean, there are literally plants that can grow through concrete.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others that if you overwater or too much sun or whatever, right? And if we can think about that, I mean, honestly, this works for parenting too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just, this is why I always go back to really at the core, I am fascinated by human experience, my own and the people that I'm interacting with. And if I can just keep that in the forefront as a trainer, as a coach, good things happen. And yeah, I would agree. Most of the time, the way that I make space for someone to show up for themselves is a ton of the work that I'm doing. It's being okay with long pauses, with emotions, because people are talking about things that maybe even professional elements about their lives that they have not been asked about or given space to truly sink into and think about. And so whenever someone asks me, well, what's the framework that you're going to follow if we're in coaching sessions? I'll tell them. There are absolutely coaches that will say to you, in session 1, we talk about this. And in session 2, we'll talk about this. And I'm not that person for you, because we're going to talk about your general aim, and then we're going to show up and we're going to trust that the rest is going to work out.
Yep.
And it does, right? And that comes from that exact thing, right? Understanding that when I create the conditions for you to see yourself, think through things, reach your potential, you can do it.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a great segue, as Luke mentioned in the introduction here. This month, we've been talking about your unique contribution. So we've talked a lot about self-leadership and gaining awareness of how we show up in the world, how we show up for the people around us, and then getting clarity on how we contribute to the organization we're part of, to our community in general. So when we say finding your unique contribution, what do we mean? I think it means understanding what our business or community needs, right? So how do we learn about that? Understanding how our own values, strengths, etc., make us unique and gives us the ability to contribute in a specific way, right? That may be different, may be a different style than another coach. But what Karen Lum brings to the table as a leader, your unique strengths, the more clarity you have around that, and the more intentional you can use those, the more effective you're going to be in your work, right? And for some of us that have been around the sun a few times, we're still doing that work, and we're still learning, and we're still becoming. But we have also context, right? You can look back and you can gain some clarity on purpose and unique capability when you've done a few things.
I really appreciate you highlighting the benefits of getting older.
I mean,
I'm needing to hear that right now.
All the benefits right now. So figuring out how those things align, right? And so I would love to hear, Karen, and I'd love to talk about too, like when things don't align, what happens. When we were talking a little bit earlier, you shared some, I think really powerful examples of what happens when people find themselves not in alignment with their core, whether it's the organization they work for, the role that they're in, how they're contributing, right? But let's start with kind of defining from your perspective, someone in a leadership role or someone who is focused on becoming a more intentional leader, whether they're leading others or they're, whether they're in a formal leadership role or not. How do you go about understanding what your business or the community needs?
Well, I think a piece of this is that we have to make sure we're getting still and paying attention, right? Like you have to be curious and intentional about your curiosity. And I think this is something that tends to come from maturity, is I don't always have to say the most important thing or have the mic drop moment, but did I sit around a table or in a situation where I learned something about other people? I asked really good questions of the people that were around me so that I could gain more insight and then use that insight to determine, where do I fit here or do I?
Yeah.
Right? Am I feeling connected to this particular group or community or business or mission or fill in the blank, whatever it is? And I think that's tough. It's a tough thing to learn how to do, because so much of, I feel like, the praise that we get at various points, probably starting as children, right, is more in what we can produce or what we can individually contribute.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's how we also get rewarded through organizational life. It's if we can solve the problems, or we have the answers, or we can be the go-to person, and we get recognized for that, we move up, and then that's kind of that transition point when people start leading others, and they're responsible for their team getting results, and it's about how the team is contributing, and not just, and it can be a difficult transition for people to move from individual contribution to team contribution. Now, I know you're someone who I love how you connect with people and how you show up for people and how you model the way in how to lead. And I've experienced that both as a friend and as a colleague, right? So how would what's your invitation for someone who's trying to figure out, like, what is my unique contribution? How does someone go about understanding their values, their strengths, what makes them unique?
Well, it sounds like you have had some conversations about these specific things prior to our session today, but I think, so I don't know what all those examples were that you gave, but much of it has to do with making sure that we're continuing to find ways to invest in ourselves, right? Not overlooking that. And sometimes we're going to be in organizations that really understand that and truly value it. So we'll see organizations that are now putting stipends and funding aside to allow employees and empower employees to make their own decisions about where they would like to go for resource and support. It's a really interesting idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different than saying there are 3 courses you can take. Which one would you like to sign up for?
Mm-hmm.
Versus we want you to have some agency to decide what's resonating for you and what you would like to learn more about or be a part of. But I think that piece is huge. And if you're in an organization that's not doing that, first of all, you're in a big club. And, I don't want you to feel like, I would say probably more organizations are not doing, right? But even in that situation, this is where my famous saying of "no one is coming," which is really the saying of one of my mentors, Mark David, who would get up in front of a room of all C-suite folks and say, "No one is coming." He would write it on the whiteboard and he'd say, "Look over your right shoulder, look over your left shoulder. If you want something to be different for yourself, for your team, in your life." In particular, I have to say with C-suite, we talked a lot about family.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about the personal world because he had that opportunity to do that and no one was doing that. Right? This is early and mid 90s. And that just wasn't happening in big companies like Charles Schwab and Continental Airlines. And those weren't conversations that were happening. And people were actually pretty discontented in many ways and just kind of sucking it up. So it was a big opportunity. But that whole phrase is really all about, don't wait for someone to advocate for you. Find the resource, find the tools, read the book, go to the conference, listen to the podcast, circle up some people who have thoughts like yours or thoughts not like yours, and spend more time learning about yourself.
Well, and that is what it means to lead yourself, right? That is self-leadership in a nutshell. And I know you teach a lot about leadership as well, and you have leadership courses and content that you teach. I would love for you to kind of share with us the framework that you teach when it comes to self-leadership.
Sure. Right. So,
or leadership in general, I guess.
Yeah. So I wrote a course called Leadership Foundations, which is meant to be for anyone who wants to double down on who they are, how they're showing up in the world, and bring more leadership to their own life.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best mentors, the best managers, the best supervisors who are leading others in ways that are really working have first mastered some of their own self-coaching and self-awareness, right? And so there's 4 pieces that I focus on early on in the course. And then, of course, we go into some other principles and things around leadership that they can practice. But specifically, self-awareness, situational awareness, caring, and courage when it really got down to it. And I just thought about all the people that I've worked with, right? Over the years, 25 years of facilitating, training, and really just coaching for this last chunk of time since 2013. But during all of my career, when I thought about it, if one of those 4 are missing, we've got an issue as far as whether we can reach our potential.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you were to imagine you put me in charge of a team of people, and now I'm supposed to guide, inspire, direct, whatever it is, nurture, grow. And yet I have a blind spot either in my own self-awareness. Situational awareness is actually a huge one, right? And you guys probably study quite a bit about this as well, and just how it ties so closely into EQ. I mean, when you look at the studies around really effective leaders, high emotional intelligence is a key quality. And so much of that is related to situational awareness, that I can come into any situation and quickly assess the dynamics, the relationships, the vibe, the energy, what's needed, which is not always something that's needed from me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or sometimes what's needed from me is I need to sit back. That's actually a form of leadership.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not taught a lot about
provide
that.
Space for others to, I used to dance a lot of tango, and I would always have a tango metaphor for everything, because tango is a metaphor for life. But the leader's role in tango is to make the follower look good. It's to highlight what the follower is doing. And most of the work that the leader is doing on the dance floor is to get out of the way, out of the follower's way, so they can shine and do the really beautiful movements or whatever it is that, the leader might initiate, the follower responds. But what resonated for me there and what you shared is sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is to step out of the way and make the space for someone else to really come into their own, or to be able to work things out in a way that they need to.
Yeah. And, what that sparks for me is, over the last few years, I've gotten some feedback from people that's like, oh, you're really good at financials. Right. And I'm like, yeah, no. But you need me to be. And so that's how you know me. And
that's so interesting.
And I don't say that to say that, oh, yes, I'm good at a wide variety of things, but just I've found
you are.
Well, please no. Yes, more.
Yes, more.
Yes, more. I'll take all the praise that I can get. No, but for me, I was like, I could look at this and say, I'm not in my sweet spot, because my sweet spot is probably something that looks a little bit different. It's probably facilitating a strategic planning retreat. If I was just like, where am I top 2% in the world? probably facilitating strategic planning, probably not building a financial model with like 20 tabs of an Excel sheet, right? But the fact that someone thinks I'm good at that and it was helpful to them, instead of me saying, oh, I'm totally doing the wrong work, I need to only facilitate strategic planning retreats, I was like, I feel kind of good about this. Like I was able to meet a need, and I'm not going to do some things, right? There are some things that I'm absolutely the wrong person for. I need to know what they are. I need to stay away from them. But I think there's this element of being able to flex into what the team needs that I think people should like lean into. And I'm curious, Karen, as you've coached leaders or as you've kind of entered rooms or entered engagements with a client, any kind of stories or examples that you have of people finding a sweet spot, but it's maybe was surprising to them?
That's such a good question. I can't think of like a specific example for what you're talking about, but I think it's really interesting that you're bringing up, you haven't used this word, but to me, I'm hearing versatility a little bit, and that is something that can be very powerful for us. And by the way, not just professionally.
Right.
Like, I think having versatility as a human being, right? It doesn't come from just doing the things that I innately know how to do, right, early on in life. But frankly, it comes from trying things and crashing and burning and experiencing different things and improving, right? Honing something a little bit, even if it's not the ultimate most favorite part of what I do every day. Can I add value? And all of a sudden, oh, isn't this interesting? If I'm appreciated for this and I'm good at it. I mean, I could think about in my own career the number of times, especially working for smaller to mid-sized companies, where, you look around the room of the executive team and questions like, well, somebody in here needs to do this. Who's the best of the options that we have?
Yeah.
And a lot of that, what's interesting about that is a lot of that comes from who is already trusted and who is already aligned with the mission and the values of the organization. And based on those qualifications first, has enough of an ability and versatility to make this other thing happen. And what's so interesting about that is, to me, that comes back to the third piece, which is the caring piece. And maybe even courage a little bit, right? But if I care about what we're creating and our aim and where we're headed, and my colleagues look at me and say, of all of us in this room, you're really the best person to do this piece right now. I mean, not only does that feel good, but I care enough about where we're headed that I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah, and I think there's an empowering element around this conversation for young mid-career people who might feel pigeonholed. Because, going back to your saying, like, no one's coming, like, they're not going to hire someone to fix the gap that you see in your organization, right? Oh, this process is broken, or, oh, we failed at this task again, or we've got another defect, and it's the same defect we've had 10 times. Like, no one else is going to fix it. And over, what I see is that whoever is like, I have a solution, let me try. Now, this isn't true everywhere. There are some truly toxic places where they're like, no, don't touch it, leave it broken. If that's the case, like, run. Yeah.
don't stay
of
there.
all times in the last 20 years, right? This is probably the best time to find another job. So like, just do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, be empowered and be a little bit courageous. And people that solve problems are incredibly valuable. And it doesn't have to be something that you have a degree in or you got your black belt.
Gosh,
who
that's
cares?
for sure.
Go watch
Right?
YouTube, right? Go watch YouTube and learn about it and go fix it. And why not? Why not be the person to fix it?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I do think that that's valued by most, right? And that's the difference also, something that we learn with maturity, I think, is like, how can I come in the room and add value, not from complaining or talking about what's not working, but from saying, I have an idea.
Yeah.
And that does require some courage, because you are not always met with, oh, great, we'd love to hear about it and you should go do that.
Right.
Sometimes there is this is where we were just talking before we started about, resilience and endurance, like both of those come into play.
Mm-hmm.
You also can't always be looking around the room only for all the nods of like, yeah, just make it happen. Sometimes you have to quietly work away at something
Mm-hmm.
and let the people come around.
Yeah.
Right.
So this model that you introduced, Karen, what I love about it, I don't know if it's coincidental or not. I think we are all very kind of aligned in we have shared experience, even though you and I met. You were one of the first people I met when I first moved to Bozeman, actually, to Montana. And I took some classes from you. I just left corporate world. I was just starting a new business by myself. I'd never started a business before. So I signed up for any business class I could find. And that's how you and I met. And I've taken classes from you since too. And I've loved learning from you. But I also know that the three of us share life experience and philosophy. And there's a lot of alignment. But even in terms of unbeknownst, you didn't know the specific contents of the leadership program that we've written and developed and taught it's been kind of evolving, but the version of it that we teach now teaches this framework. And we've been talking about it all season on this podcast. Notice, choose, act is the framework. And what struck me as interesting is how similar to the concepts that you just shared, right? And I have not taken that Foundations leadership course from you, right? So it's not a piece of content that I have explicitly heard you teach. Right. And yet there's so much similarity, right? Notice is about awareness. And I love how you call out specifically both self-awareness and situational awareness. And what we notice, it depends on our experiences, our personality, right? And training ourselves to notice more. We can gain more situational awareness by focusing, paying attention. And then we talk about choose, right? So that's really, do I care enough to do something about this situation, this thing that I'm noticing? Whether it's in this room, whether it's in this organization, whether it's in my family, right? And then courage, having the courage to act. And that's really, we talk about having the courage to actually do something about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about even my own personal situation right now, right? There are some things that I absolutely have the courage to act on. And there are some other things that I've noticed, I'm aware of them. I know that I know what my choices are, or at least I know some choices. I know that I have choices. And
we're stopping there.
And we're still, we've been, quietly avoiding this thing that I know I need to take care of.
This is where the no one is coming thing comes from, right? Yeah. And then you make the decisions about whether you decide you're ready to act on something, or you need more information, or whatever it is. Sometimes we just need more courage, which can come from other people too, right?
True.
Just making sure that we're showing up, being vulnerable, talking about the things that are hard for us or that we're stuck around. I was just going to add something when you were talking about the noticing piece. I think for anyone who's listening who already leads people and teams, man, if we could start recognizing people for making space for others and noticing the details and the nuances and practicing situational awareness, right? When we're giving specific positive feedback to someone, not to make it always about when you're the person that stands in front of the room and says the important thing or shares the fact or has the mic drop moment, but can we also be looking for the people who are trying to make space for others, who are practicing not just being oriented around what they individually can contribute and know, but really how they're showing up for the greater aim or goals of of the organization, the team, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think this is problematic that we don't do this enough. In particular, those of us who already are in positions of influence.
Mm-hmm.
It is one of the fastest ways to start seeing more of the behaviors that we're actually hoping for in people.
Yeah. And we can even back it up another step, and we can recognize people for doing that when they're not even aware that they're doing it for the group.
Absolutely.
So if someone maybe they ask a hard question, you'd be like, I really appreciate it that you brought that up. Let's get to that question in a second. But first off, I just want to thank you, because you having the courage to ask the question, I think makes all of us a little bit more courageous. And we want this to be a place where it's okay to not have the answer and to ask hard questions. So like, let's all give it up, right? For Joe down there at the end of the table, right?
Yeah.
So I love that tip of just watching as a leader. What are those things that create space for others that we can reinforce and recognize?
Yeah, I do think that would be helpful. Like, that would be a hell of a movement if we could start doing that more often. We say we want it, but then we're not really acknowledging it very often. And frankly, when we're within an organizational context, we're all making decisions every day about what we think it looks like to hit the home run. And so if the accolades come from this certain kind of home run every time, it doesn't take very long for us to learn, oh, that's how it works here.
Yeah.
And it's potent. I mean, when you do
Absolutely.
it, the person who maybe asked the hard question, they might not even realize the courage that it took for them to do that, right? They have this squirmy feeling in their stomach, but they care more about the mission than about, avoiding pain. But then when you name that in front of the group with them, like, people will tear up. Like, they really value and will remember that type of recognition, much more than, hey, everyone got their stuff in on time. Great job, everybody.
Right. That's the truth.
So Karen, what does it look like? And I know we've already been talking about, application here as well, but I'd love to hear just some examples of what does it look like when someone is truly able to contribute in a way that's aligned with who they are. And then on the flip side, what happens when we discover that we're not in alignment, or maybe we're in alignment but haven't even discovered it yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would probably all agree that when you're in that sweet spot of having alignment with the mission, aim, philosophy, fill in the blank, vision, goals of an organization, right? And most importantly, the way in which we've agreed to do the work together, right? It's really less the what and more the how. How are we going to do the work together? Like, that piece being aligned is really key. Because we can all say we're going after the same thing, but if the way we're going to get it done isn't aligned, we're probably going to hit lots of roadblocks, lots of frustration, be incredibly focused on the way we're different instead of how we can make things happen together, right? Even if we do have differences in how we do it.
Yeah.
So I will say that's one thing that I would encourage teams to do more of, which often means that an individual needs to be the one to encourage the team. Let's not just set expectations around what we're doing and by when. How are we going to do the work together? What is it going to look like?
Right.
So that piece, I think, is critical. But honestly, when you're aligned with the work you're doing and the way you're doing it, it's going to change the satisfaction that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And when you change the satisfaction, it changes the engagement that you have, right? This is where that deeper caring comes from. I feel drawn to it. It feels important to me. I feel seen and known by the people that I work with and for. Like, all of a sudden, all the gears are turning in the right direction, right? So I think we'll see better problem solving. We'll see more willingness to be courageous in challenging situations when we feel connected to the work we're doing, right? And we feel like there are some either innate qualities about us or some skills that we've developed over time that are appreciated by other people.
Yeah.
I don't want to oversimplify this because I think there are exceptions to what I'm getting ready to say. But I think to go back to self-awareness and situational awareness, if folks listening think about their level of collaboration day to day with other departments, team members, whatever it is, I think there's a really high correlation between is the way that we work aligned, how we do what we do, not just what we do. If we're clear on how we do what we do and we all have the same understanding of what that how looks like, we're going to be more collaborative and, again, generalization, more productive, have more durable solutions that aren't just me fixing something in my silo and then it accidentally messes something up for someone else in their silo. And so I guess I say all of that because, I think that would be a great self-assessment to really sit back and say, like, how much do I interface with the other people on my team, leaders on other teams? If the answer is not very much, there's probably some wins to be had if we approached work differently. Or maybe that's a survival strategy, right? We're so unaligned in how we get our work done that I have to sequester myself.
Yeah, we stay in our silos.
Not willing to endure the pain of trying to align on how we get things done. So I'm going to sequester myself.
Oh, for sure. And often those are folks that are what I call an organizational leader, right? So someone who doesn't own the company, but they work within a company, who then begin to start seeking some support, counsel, coaching, because they're feeling isolated. It's not feeling good to do the work they're doing. They might be good at the work they're doing, but they're all of a sudden, and they can't always put their finger on it, but things aren't feeling great anymore, right? And what we would probably say is they're not feeling aligned for you. Much of it ends up coming down to how we're doing the work together and also like what we value. Are we saying that we value certain things, but then we're asking people to work on the weekends or to do whatever it takes to close the sale and not think about something else. And all of a sudden these things there starts to be disconnection that happens over time. It happens enough time that people say, oh, I don't feel like, our walk is matching our talk. And that's a pretty shitty feeling.
Yeah. And I think there are some developmental phases where there's some healthy doing it your own way. I think about young high potentials who say, what, everywhere else I was kind of shit rolled downhill and, but here I'm going to be the dam and I'll take it all and my team's going to have an amazing experience. And I think that's probably okay for whatever, 3 years, 5 years. But at some point, those leaders usually mature to the point where they say, like, you know what, I can't do this. It depends on me. If I leave, what does that do to everyone else? I'm not the owner. Is this really my responsibility? Which I think is an appropriate developmental question to ask. So I guess the reason I bring that up is because I think since we're talking about where is my fit, right? What's the unique contribution that I'm making? I do think it's time and place in a lot of ways, whether it's walking in a room and seeing what that room needs in that specific meeting or session, or whether it's, in the season of life where I'm at, what I need, hey, I really need health insurance. Right now I'm going to do the best I can in this setting, even though it's not optimal. And that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because that is really, really important, I think, this piece about time and place, and that there are sacrifices that we make at certain times. And this goes back to just be really clear about your why. Because there are positions that I've been in my career that were not my favorites, but I was crystal clear about why I would spend another 14 months somewhere. And once I had that clarity, it changed everything about how I could show up every day. Well, part of that comes from also tapping into your personal agency. Oh, this isn't happening to me. It's happening for me. And I always have choice at some level. Right? And when we lose that, it creates alarm and panic. all of a sudden we feel like I don't have any say in this and I'm stuck. And then all of a sudden, like the spiral is pretty negative. I mean, it's a good point because I think there are times that you can do something that may not be your favorite thing, but you're good enough at it or you're really good at it. Sometimes we're great at something that we actually don't love doing on a regular basis. But you get very clear, this is a vehicle to get me closer to some other goal I have, something else I'm aiming for, and therefore it's worth it to keep showing up. And then the season changes. And when it's not anymore, this is that whole piece of like, what are you waiting for? Right. When you have to keep stepping into self-evaluation. And, you know, Hannah knows I lead a lot of what I call self-inventories, which are really these opportunities to look at key aspects of your life and check in about how are they actually working out for me? And yeah, I'm not going to wait for anybody else to change it. If it's not working for me, I'm going to have to take some action.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you just talked about as sacrifices, I think of them as trade-offs or cost to, you know, you exchange something for something else. And there's always a cost to everything, right? And the cost can be, obviously, there are financial costs that we have for things, but there's time cost, there's emotional cost, there is cost in terms of effort, right? And if for anything we want to achieve in life, there is a cost. And I think it's helpful to be aware of that. Take that inventory of where am I spending my energy? Where am I spending my time, my focus? But if I don't know why, I think that's often when we get discouraged, disillusioned, we kind of lose our way because we get stuck in the situation that isn't ideal. And then we forget that we have options, that we have choices.
Yeah, and I'm going to risk throwing us off here.
No.
But
Here we go.
I don't believe it.
Okay, so there's this, I'm going to come back to this. So there's a ongoing debate, and I think it's going to become really public in the next 5 to 10 years about who's making the decisions, the life and death decisions with self-driving cars, right? So if a car is driving itself, so any car that you see driving itself, it has an algorithm in it that is programmed to choose in X scenario, like, what do I do? Do I hit the puppy? Do I hit the person? Do I avoid the stroller and hit the grown-up? Right? Do I avoid this?
You're gonna spin me out, man.
Right? Do I avoid this little passenger car and hit the semi? Right? There's all of these choices. And what the self-driving car, you know, manufacturers would say is that, well, they're not really saying this, which is my point. They would say we're safer, and they're right. Out of, let's say, 100 hours of driving or 10,000 hours of driving, with a self-driving car, it's much less likely in that 10,000 hours of driving that there's going to be a fatality than with humans driving. But I think one of their challenges and something that they're going to have to, you know, right now they're avoiding that. They're avoiding saying yes, there's an algorithm that's making a choice. But eventually the public is going to have to grapple with that and say, are we willing to let the machine choose for us in those life or death scenarios? Do I hit the stroller or do I hit the parent pushing the stroller? And is it worth it that we're going to have less people die to give up that control in those split seconds? And I guess why I brought this up is because clarity that that's the decision we have to make as a society is much more helpful than self-driving car founders saying, oh, it's safer, it's safer, it's safer, it's safer. Like, that's not honest about the choice that's being made and where the source of that choice is. And I think the same for ourselves. When you talk about trade-offs, Hannah, or when we talk about like, hey, this is just for a season, guess what? Our brains have algorithms in them too. And if we ignore them, they will keep us on whatever path we're on, and they're going to manage risk and make split-second decisions and all of that. But it's more helpful to us to uncover what those algorithms are in our mind, what those split-second decisions are. What are the factors that have been either, I was going to say bred into us, maybe that's too, not the right words here.
Well, I mean, ultimately,
not very genteel, but like our genetics and our personality, right, has some of that algorithm in it. But it's more helpful for us to like do the digging and know what that is, so that we then have the agency to say, I'm going to trust my gut in this scenario.
Right.
Or I'm going to go hire Karen to be my co-pilot because I need someone else to question this algorithm that's running in my head that keeps me stuck here when I'm not quite happy when I pull into my parking space or log in every day. So
it's like the
I don't know if
ultimate
that's
pros
helpful
and
or
cons.
not. Right, right. But it just, my point is, the more we understand where our choice is and the more agency that we create, even on really hard decisions, like the better.
Yeah. Some of that's just like what you're describing is like, make some space to tease it out. Right? Don't just keep going through the motions and saying to yourself, I guess this is just the cards I was dealt or how it has to be, or fill in the blank. And even in situations where you may not be experiencing alignment between your talents, interests, and the contributions that you have an opportunity to make in a certain situation, I think those are the times to pause and just say, is there something that I'm exchanging this for? And if so, is that enough of a meaningful why for me to be able to get up every day and give it my best go? And maybe there's a time stamp to that I need to be aware of, a milestone in which, I'm really big on these milestones, right? Every quarter, I want my whole huddle community checking in around their personal inventories of, usually it's about 18 key aspects of your life, and just being like, what's out of whack? What's working for you? What's not working for you? And my gosh, if we were doing that with our people in a business setting, and I think there's fear around that, because what happens when I actually empower someone to think about what's not working for them? Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet think about the possibility of increased caring and increased courage if you are actually given the opportunity to stop and think about these things for yourself. So there's risk to it, yes, but I think there's also risk in not doing it.
Yep.
And it's hard to measure that, because so much of that, I think, is the spinning and the lack of productivity and the lack of clarity that we all sit with silently.
Yeah.
Right? You're sitting there at your computer thinking, I'm not sure what to start with, or I don't know how my manager feels about me, or I don't know if I'm really making a difference. It's hard to measure that. It's happening all over the place, and nobody talks about it. So, to bring it up and give people space to actually consider these things, I actually believe it would help retention of the right people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And sometimes it means that some people find their way somewhere else. I don't always think that's a bad thing.
It's not always a bad thing. And sometimes the right people are the right people for a season. And then the right thing for that person. And if you are a caring leader, you care about them enough to release them to what's next for them. And in fact, encourage them to grow into what's next for them. And if that doesn't exist in this organization, or if what's next for them in their next stage of development as a leader, as a professional, as a human, is to gain more experience outside of this organization, then we should be encouraging, empowering people to do that.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring this back to an Edwin Friedman, quote again, which I know I've talked about on the podcast before. But family systems therapist turned leadership and organization consultant guy. And he said, I keep looking and I can't find any organization that progresses past the emotional maturity of its most senior leader. And I'm kind of right there with him. I keep looking too, and I haven't found it yet.
We sure have tried to help some organization progress past that point, and it has not worked. Right?
Well, it progresses sometimes, and then you're like, wait a second, I became the senior leader. That's not really my job.
Whoops, that's not sustainable.
Whoops. I don't think that's going to work. But I think to bring this back to like essentially this should I stay or should I go question that we're talking about for people who are listening, like if your emotional maturity has progressed past that of your most senior leader, like you got a choice to make because the organization isn't going to magically transform around you. Right. So what are you going to do? And that doesn't mean you have to leave. You just need to have expectations or say, my primary challenge here is to help my senior most leader mature.
Yeah.
Right.
And
if there's an opening to do so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm thinking about this in different ways. I definitely have also seen, and we have an example of this where the most senior leader, the founder, recognizes that he's taken it as far as he can take it and brings in someone else to steer the ship and help to actually evolve and grow this business past his own capacity, right? And that's really powerful when that happens. There's still all those transitions are really difficult, letting go.
Yeah, a lot of deep ownership. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
To allow someone else to continue and take it in, the general direction that it is aligned. But to your point earlier, often there's disagreement about how we get there, right?
Yeah, but I'm going to go back to your model, Karen, which is, am I aware of my own limitations? Do I have that self-awareness? Am I aware that people are kind of fed up with situational awareness? Do I care enough about those people?
Right.
And then have the courage to say, I'm going to hand this thing off to a leadership team.
Right.
I'm going to augment my skills by bringing other people into that senior most fold, or by saying, I've got to take a different role. Mm-hmm. Right. And we see that all the time with people saying, you know what, I'm going to be COO and I need to bring in a real CEO, or I'm going to be R&D and I'm going to bring in a CEO. Or like, hey, I need a different mentor for my kid because I'm not the right person because of my hangups and the way we interact. Like, I'm self-aware enough. Yep. I see that things aren't going well. Yep. I really love my kid and I have the courage to ask for help and bring someone else in. So, I mean, it's the same no matter the setting. So, yeah, I'm curious your thoughts.
I mean, I think we're very aligned on this, right? And I don't think it's an accident. The three of us work with and engage with a lot of different humans. Mm-hmm. And so when you see enough of it and you are often invited behind the scenes so that you're really getting the clearest picture possible, and it can take time.
Yeah.
Right? You start to recognize, that's why I just keep going back to, aren't we all just really fascinated with human experience?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the opportunities that we have to just help people get more engaged with that themselves. So I don't know. I'm a nerd when it comes to this, right? Like, I'm just fascinated by it. I think it's so interesting.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just to see how it shakes out and then how it works in different environments. You add this particular element to it, or you take one out, whether that be a personality or a challenge or a dynamic, and it can shift things. And to me, that's empowering.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's this whole thing of just sitting back and saying, okay, wait a minute. All this is humanly created. Mm-hmm. We can change it if it's not working. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that looks like having enough influence to change it organizationally and from the top. Sometimes there are changes you can make, by the way, if you are a mid-level manager or a supervisor or someone who's thinking, well, I don't have the power and influence to change the way the entire culture works.
Yeah.
First of all, I have coached many individuals who do not have that level of influence, but are given enough room to build often what I call a subculture within their own teams. And I've surely done that.
Sure.
I mean, one of the most toxic places that I ever worked, I was very clear about my why, of why I needed to be there for a certain length of time. And by the way, I could have never imagined the way in which the things I learned from working in that specific industry would help me now and benefit my clients now. Had no crystal ball for any of that whatsoever, right? That's that piece of this is happening for me. It's not happening to me, right? But even in a toxic culture, I figured out a way to have some agency over how my specific team was going to do the work.
Yeah.
There were certain things from above that we couldn't control, like some unrealistic goals and things like that. But how we did the work, how we took care of each other, and how we worked with our clients, we actually had a lot of autonomy there. And so that felt empowering. So just a reminder that we don't always have to have all the control to, execute some agency around certain things and make a difference for some people that are counting on us.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I know we could continue to talk for hours on that. We're a bunch of nerds here, and we love these kinds of conversations. But Karen, just before as we kind of wrap up here, any specific tips or final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners who may be looking for their specific, unique contribution?
I think I would say stay curious and give yourself the credit that you deserve to learn and figure out more about yourself and what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and the stories that you tell yourself that are getting in your way versus the things that you tell yourself that help you move forward, right? Yep. I think surround yourself with people who aren't yesing you to death and that ask you really, really good questions and that are really interested in your thoughts and answers, right? So much of it is like invest in yourself. And of course I'm going to say that. But I really do, it doesn't matter what that looks like. It can be, like I said, it can be reading books. It can be spending more time being thoughtful, journaling, really contemplating, and also try things. Say yes to things that maybe feel scary and see if you can challenge yourself. Like I think a lot of times how we learn about our potential is not from staying safe and doing the things that come easy to us. Right? And this is where, when we're in challenging situations, if we can embrace that, it's like, man, this is going to serve me. I'm learning more from this, even though this is not easy, than I am learning from the times that things have all gone my way and been so smooth, right? So, but I think sometimes it's hard to remind ourselves of that. So I'm a big fan of self-coaching, and the only way to be an effective self-coach is to slow down and pay attention. So that's what I would say.
I love it. Thank you. Luke, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom in on self-awareness and situational awareness and just say, like, the things that you don't know are knowable. And if you want to know what your blind spot is, ask somebody. And if you want to know how things are going, ask people. And unless things are real bad and toxic, like generally they'll tell you. And, I think if you haven't been surprised by feedback in the last year, or you haven't said, this is something that I think is a blind spot and I'm going to work on it, this is a great time to do that. So in general, the place to start is with yourself. And that could be a way to hack issues in your role as well. If you're not happy, things aren't going well. Okay, well, work on yourself a little bit. What's the next thing you could do to level up? And if nothing else, it's going to give you a little bit more utility and perspective.
Awesome. I love it. Great takeaways, Luke. All right, Karen, if people want to connect with you, learn more about your work, how help and support business owners and teams, how can they find you?
The best way is really on my website, which is just my first initial K and my last name Lum Consulting.com, klumconsulting.com. So all my events and workshops are there, and also the work and services that I do with individuals and teams. So that's the best way to follow along.
All right. Wonderful. Yes, I highly recommend Karen. Go give her a follow. She's on all the social medias. She is very active on Instagram if you are on there. And she's constantly sharing helpful and supportive information and lessons that are really valuable. So
sure, trying. Just keep showing up. That's what you got to do.
Keep showing up, my friend. And I'm in awe at how you show up. If we were all that consistent.
Well, I'm just going to take it. I'm going to take that as a compliment.
Yes, that is, you are amazing at just showing up consistently. And I think that's one of the reasons, people have come to see you as this trusted advisor, coach, confidant, in all of your circle, right? And so thank you for doing that, for showing up for me and for all of us.
Thanks. Well, thank you both for having me. What a fun conversation.
It's been really, really wonderful.
Anyone who doesn't think this is going to continue after this recording turns off is wrong.
Oh yeah, the conversation will for sure continue. So, but with that, I'm going to close us out. Just want to remind our listeners that you can download the free guide that will help you follow along this whole series. There's some self-reflection questions for you and some things for you to kind of work through to do some of your own work around this. And you can download that guide at magicintheroom.com. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Provence, Hannah Broderud, and Luke Freeman. It is produced by Ben West. Social media management by Emma Holland and Michael Manfredi. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. His music is to be found on Apple Music. This episode was recorded on-site location at Sky Oro in Bozeman, Montana. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find previous episodes at